optometry school vlogs, but I haven't formally introduced myself. My name is Michelle, and I'm an incoming second year in optometry school. I received a lot of comments and requests for me to talk about the optometry school application process, as well as my journey to applying and getting into optometry school. So I just wanted to go over that in this video and also answer a couple of questions that I received as well. So let's get into it. And I have my notes with me on my laptop so that I don't forget or miss anything in this video. The drink that I have for today, I just have a regular matcha latte to drink during this talk. Starting off with the optometry school application process. So when I was looking into optometry school, I was researching the schools that are in the area, as well as what type of requirements each school has in terms of courses and extracurriculars and letter work as well. And so one of the things that I was looking for when I was applying for optometry school is that I wanted to go to a school in California. 3 schools that I was looking into was UC Berkeley, SCCO, and Western University. And when you're looking into optometry schools, make sure you're looking at all of their requirements, because a lot of the requirements for each school are very similar, but there are some small things that are different between each school. So just make sure that when you're researching the schools, you're looking at every detail and making sure that the classes that you're going to take for optometry school aligns with what they're looking for. For SCCO, a bachelor's degree isn't required. When I was looking to optometry school, I had already was in the process of getting my bachelor's degree, and so this doesn't apply to me, but that's one of the things I noticed for SCCO. I'm not sure about the other schools, but that's one thing I noticed. When it came to prereqs for when I was applying for optometry school, I had already fulfilled most of the requirements for optometry school because of the major that I had in undergrad. In undergrad, I was a public health sciences major, so it did include the basic chemistry, biology, organic chemistry, and physics as well. But with my major, I was not able to get priority enrollment in microbiology and the microbiology lab, as well as anatomy. And so when it came to when I wanted to graduate undergrad, I realized that it was more beneficial for me to graduate undergrad early, 2 quarters early, instead of staying until June of 2024 and trying to enroll in classes with the possibility of not getting the class I needed for optometry school. And so I ended up graduating early, December 2023, and I enrolled in 2 community college courses, which ended up being general microbiology and microbiology lab, as well as anatomy. And I took that after I graduated. And so just to put this into timeline for you to better understand, I was in undergrad from August 2020 to December 2023. And then I enrolled into community college classes for those 2 courses. And I took those classes from January 2024 to May 2024. In this process of trying to figure out whether your classes fulfills the requirements for that optometry school, I highly recommend going to their drop-by advising sessions. I know SCCO did that, and I actually joined their advising session to make sure my classes fulfilled the requirement. I also did that for Western as well. So the reason why I had gone to a lot of advising sessions when I was applying for optometry school was because I had taken physics abroad through the study abroad program in England during my summer of sophomore year. And so I wasn't sure if the course that I took abroad fulfilled the requirement for the school. So I jotted down questions before my appointment with the admissions counselor just to make sure I had all my questions answered during my advising session, which I highly recommend if you have questions on whether or not the classes that you're taking is accepted by the school. This is my Notion page for optometry school. This helped me organize what I need to do and just jot down some notes that I would potentially forget if I didn't jot them down. It's not as organized as I would like, but here I would put any remaining prereqs that I looked into. I also have possible shadowing offices that I could reach out to. I also have personal statement ideas, and I would add links to admission website and then just like FAQs that I wanted easy access to. I also have notes on my interviews for each school, brain dumps, OAT, questions I wanted to ask during the drop-in advising sessions I also listed here. So just a Notion page that just helps me have everything all in one spot. So the next thing I will be talking about is the OAT. And the OAT is a standardized test that you need to take to be considered for admission for optometry school. And this is a 5-hour test that includes quantitative reasoning, reading comprehension, general biology, general chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics. When I was preparing for the OAT, I knew I wanted to study during summer break just because that's when I have the most time to dedicate for the OAT. And so the summer before I graduated, it was during this time, 2023, I had signed up for OAT Booster. OAT Booster is one of the websites that guides your studying for the OAT. It provides practice questions, practice tests, and lets you know how you're scoring, what your stronger and weaker topics are, which is very helpful when you're studying for a really long and dense standardized test. So I highly recommend downloading OAT Booster because I felt like it really helped with my studying. OAT Booster also has study plans. I used the 12-week study plan, and it has what days you should study, what subjects, throughout those 12 weeks, which is very helpful. During this time as well, I was working full-time during the summer, and not long after I had ordered the OAT Booster was when I realized that working full-time and studying for the OAT just did not work for me. I know other people it did and they were able to manage their time, but me personally, after working a full day at work, and then coming home and having to study for the OAT, I was just so mentally exhausted, and I just preferred studying for the OAT when I have a fresh mind, and I just preferred studying in the morning. And so I actually requested a few days off from work a week from my doctor and had 2 full days to study while working. I remember out of the 2 days I was off work, one of the days was set for my practice test days. The other day was set aside for studying weak topics and any questions that I got wrong from the practice test that I had taken previously. The biggest thing that helped me the most when I was studying for the OAT is running through a lot of practice questions, because you have an idea of what type of questions they ask you for each subject. It helped me decide what study method works best for me. And even though studying for the OAT was a rough time, I studied from, I registered for OAT Booster around July 4th, but I don't think I fully locked in and studied until August, beginning to mid-August. And so from then on until my test date that I scheduled November 1st, felt like a really long period of just grinding and studying. But during that time period, I realized which study method works best for me. Realized when I'm studying for biology, which required a lot of memorization in comparison to quantitative reasoning and organic chemistry and physics, I required a lot of practice problems to really grill the concepts and material for that subject. Even though it's a long period of time, you can see what works best for you. Perhaps you like studying at night more rather than the morning, or you prefer taking practice tests on a Saturday, or you taking tests on a Wednesday. So when I took the OAT, I actually scored a 320, which an average score, I would say that optometry schools usually look for is an average of 300 And at least for me, I was heavily debating on whether or not to retake the OAT to get a higher score. But at the time, I was already set on applying for that cycle. And so I didn't know if waiting to retake that test was fully worth it to submit my application later. And so I decided to just submit my test score after I've already seen it and see where the application takes me. That's all I have to say about the OAT in terms of my experience. What I want to talk about is letter of recommendations, and if there's any type of requirement that's different between optometry schools. I did notice that the letter of recommendations were different between the optometry schools. So make sure you look and see what type of letter of recommendation they're looking for. Looking at the SECO website right now, and for SECO they require 2 letter of recs, one from an optometrist or an ophthalmologist, optometrist preferred, and then the other letter of rec is just dependent on who you would prefer having a letter of rec from. So that would include your past, present employer, faculty member, science, or any other subject from the courses you've taken, supervisor from a volunteer organization that you were involved in. They do require 2 letter of recommendations, but you're able to upload up to 4. I do know other schools, I believe for SUNY, they have a 3 letter of recommendations requirement, and instead of any faculty member, they're actually looking for a science faculty member. Make sure when you're researching optometry schools to look and see what type of letter of recommendations you're looking for, and you set aside time to request a letter of recommendation from the professor or doctor. Give them time to write that. It's one of the things you have to take into account when you're submitting applications and figuring out when you want to submit your application, because I had asked my professors and doctors, I want to say 1 or 2 months in advance, but if you already know who you want to ask, I would highly suggest asking as early as possible. Depending on who you ask, they may have a busy schedule and they just have a lot of things on their plate. So the earlier you ask, the more time they set aside to fill out the letter of recommendation, and you're able to submit in your application at a time that you want to submit without having to wait on the letter of recommendation because you happen to ask late. Because optometry school is rolling admissions and it's better to submit in earlier while there's more seats rather than later, it's where planning and figuring out when to ask letter of recommendations is really, really important when you're planning to apply. When I was asking for letter of recommendations, I honestly had trouble figuring out who to ask for the faculty member. I ended up asking a faculty member in my last quarter when I was applying for optometry school, because it just so happened I built a really strong connection with her and I really enjoyed her class, that I ended up asking her to write my letter of recommendation. I ended up also asking a supervisor for the volunteer organization that I was a part of. I also asked a past employer, and then I also asked the doctor that I was working for at the time. Oh, I forgot to mention this when I was filming the video, but you submit your application through OptumCast, and this is where you put in all your prereqs that you've completed, your personal statements and supplementary essays, where letter of recommendations are submitted. I'm going to be talking about personal statements and my journey together so that you can see how I showcased what I did in undergrad into my essays. The first question that they always ask is something along the lines of what makes you want to do optometry. And so for my personal statement, I talked about how I had worn an eye patch when I was younger, and I never fully understood why I was wearing an eye patch every single day for a couple of hours. All I knew was that one eye wasn't working as enough compared to my other eye, and it was something I had to wear in public to fulfill the couple of hours that I had every single day. And so growing up, I was very curious to know or learn more about this condition, which I later on learned is called amblyopia, but In simple terms, I always knew of it as lazy eye, and so I was very curious to learn more about that condition. And I also had a cousin who is an optometrist now too. Like, I fully didn't know much about optometry until I started working at a private practice. And at that private practice, I was working as a front receptionist, basically taking calls, making appointments. I also was in charge of pre-testing in the back, so I basically did all the preliminary testing before they went to see the optometrist. And so from that job, I learned a lot about insurances, just even being comfortable with speaking on the phone and talking to patients. Before that, I never really had a job that had to do with speaking to like customers or just like interactions with people. This job allowed me to get out of my comfort zone and be comfortable with talking to people and like building connections with them. And I worked there for 1.5 years, so it was basically my 3rd year in undergrad, and I worked there all the way until the beginning of summer before I started optometry school. So a good amount of time, and I gained a lot of skills and learned a lot about myself through that job. That is one of the things I talked about in my personal statement. I talked about why I was interested in optometry, talked about what expanded my passion for optometry, which is working at that job. I also was an intern for the iMobile for children at my undergrad, and so I talked about my experiences there and how I've never worked in an iMobile before, but I was able to work in different areas of Southern California, an interest in specializing in pediatrics, and so working in the iMobile, I was able to kind of see that sort of lifestyle that the optometrist was having at that internship. I'm going to be continuing on talking about my journey that I may have missed early on in the previous topics. A lot of the experiences that I had mentioned previously in my personal statement weren't the only experiences that I had. Those were the 3 that I felt like stood out to me. So my job, my internship, my local high school outreach role, and Rose Pageant Director. During the time I was staying for my OAT, I also started shadowing at an optometry office in a Costco. I just wanted to see what that environment is like, and just being exposed to how it's like working at an optometry office at Costco. That's something I also talked about in my interview. So it's nice to have more experiences because there's more things to reference in your interview and in your essays. So highly recommend if you have the chance to shadow at different environments and see what you like and you don't like. But all these experiences were done during undergrad, so I had my career crisis around my 3rd year of college. I was interested in optometry school, but I feel like I didn't solidify the idea until I started working at my job. And during that time, I felt like I was really behind, and I felt like I needed to get a lot of experience as possible because I felt like the people who were applying for optometry school in my college had already worked a job for a while, had already, joined the optometry club, had already done so many things that I felt like I was really behind. And so during my 3rd year, that was when I joined the optometry club. That was how I found my first job in the optometry field. That was also when I started my internship at the iMobile for children, which I found through my undergrad. That internship was actually a requirement for my major to graduate. Depending on what your major is, I'm not sure if that's a requirement for you, but luckily for me, that was an internship that was related to optometry. That's something I can gain experience from. Very grateful that my school had an internship quarter that allowed me to do that. Kind of reiterate my cycle or my journey again. So after my 3rd year was when I started studying for the OAT. So the span of July 4th until November 1st was when I was studying for the OAT, took the OAT, and it was a one and done. And because optometry school is rolling, I was very unsure on whether or not I had a chance of getting into school or not. At the time, I really wanted to go to SCCO, and I didn't know if my grades and my score and my experiences were going to get me into school. My GPA was a 3.4, so it wasn't honestly really high. I feel like my OAT score and my GPA wasn't really high, but I thought I was very involved in my extracurriculars, and so I honestly was hoping that my essays about my experiences would be what would get me into school. But I was really stressed out in terms of scores and just like everything about the optometry school process. I was honestly really stressed, and so I reached out to the admission counselor a lot. I just asked her questions, told her my concerns and everything, and the biggest thing that I took from her was she told me to worry about things that are within my control. And within my control is studying for the OAT and revising, writing my essays. And that's what helped me become less stressed about optometry school, because I'm not within control of whether or not there's enough seats for me in the school, whether or not I'll get into school with these stats. Like, I already took the test. This is the GPA I had when I graduated. Like, there's just really nothing I can do at this point because it's already passed, and I can only worry about things that I can worry on now. When I took my OAT in November, it takes, I want to say, 2 to 3 weeks for the score to be sent to the schools that you want to send to. And so because of that, my score wouldn't come in for the December deadline for SCCO. I ended up just applying for the January application. Yeah, submitting in December to be considered for January. During this time, this was when I was enrolling for my community college courses. As long as you're enrolled in the classes that you need to take for optometry school, and you finish that before you start the fall semester or quarter, then that is totally fine. That's why after I got admitted to SCCO in January, I still had to take the classes to fulfill that requirement for school. I applied for Berkeley first because the deadline was earlier. For me, I'm really bad at interviews. I'm really bad with on-the-spot questions, and quite honestly speaking in general, I was extremely nervous about this interview, and I did my best to prepare for this interview. I was researching Reddit posts on previous questions years ago, Facebook groups. I was just looking into everything because I didn't really know that many people who were in the optometry field were applying for optometry school, and so I just really didn't know what to expect when it came to the interview process. For interview process for schools, they'll ask you typical interview questions. Why optometry? Biggest obstacle you faced? Some schools will ask you like ethical questions, how there's like no right or wrong answer, but they kind of want to see what your thought process is. Berkeley interview, I thought it went okay, but I do remember there was a question that I kind of fumbled. I definitely could have answered that question better. At the time, I was just so nervous and I didn't know what to say for that question. It was just like, what strong skills of mine could I bring to Berkeley and like my peers? I'm trying to remember the question. Something like that. It was like, what are my strong skills that I can bring to the school? And I just, for some reason, like I just couldn't think of what to say. I was just like rambling, and I just couldn't answer that question. And so overall, I felt like that interview went well, but I got rejected, and you know, that's okay because I ended up at my top school that I wanted to go to. For my SCCO interview, that interview went well. I felt very comfortable with my interviewer. It was very conversational. I remember I was talking about my study abroad experiences, work experience, my internship, like anything that I really tried to talk about myself that I didn't already mention in the application. Another question I wanted to answer that I did get asked, for optometry journey, I did 4 years of undergrad, and then optometry school is another 4 years. And then residency is more up to you on whether or not you want to do residency. I hope this video is helpful. Even though I took notes on what to say in the order of what to say, I feel like I was rambling. Kind of saying what came to mind. So hopefully everything I said in this video is helpful. And if there's anything that I missed in this video, please let me know if you have any more questions or another type of video that you would like to see from me. I want to say this is my first time I've sat in front of a camera and talked in a while, so hopefully it doesn't sound too choppy, but yeah, that's all I have for today, and see you in the next video.